The air hangs heavy with secrets in the humid corridors of Langley as the year turns to 2025. But the truth doesn't rot with time. It only grows louder, more insistent, like a drumbeat beneath the skin. The old man steps up to the podium, his pale hands trembling just enough for the cameras to notice his eyes, half shielded by square military-issue glasses that haven't changed since 1962. He clears his throat. His voice is gravel wrapped in wind barely raised. Yet every journalist in the room leans forward, instinctively aware that something irreversible is about to be said. "My name is Colonel Everett Lang," he begins, "and I am the last living witness to an event that never officially happened. A betrayal buried beneath a Cold War myth. A truth denied to the American people for over 60 years. Cameras flash. The silence is surgical. Everett, now 89 but bearing the scars of classified knowledge like metals burned into his soul, was once a mid-level intelligence officer stationed at the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey, before he was reassigned to a covert naval base off the Florida Keys in October 1962, under a special clearance known only as Operation Glass Eye. He was 31. Then, trim stoic with sharp cheekbones and a razor-clean flat top, the kind of man who said little and remembered everything. A graduate of West Point, fluent in Russian, trained in psychological warfare and counter-disinformation, Everett had believed, as most men did back then, in the righteousness of the American cause, until he was asked to keep watch over a steel container that should never have existed inside it. A Soviet defector, emaciated and broken, code-named Volk, who claimed not only to possess insider knowledge about the missiles in Cuba, but insisted he had personally overseen the loading of an American warhead onto a Soviet submarine. A gift he had rasped from your own vice president to Khrushchev, to ensure the arms race stayed profitable. Everett had laughed then until Volk described the codes, the shipment logs, and a grainy black-and-white photo of Nixon shaking hands with a man in a naval uniform. Everett would later identify as the KGB's Admiral Orlov. The implications rattled Everett's foundation, but protocol silenced doubt. Volk was dead within 48 hours, an apparent suicide, though Everett remembers the bruising on the defector's ribs and the strange lack of blood. The body was cremated within 6, the logs destroyed, and Operation Glass Eye sealed into a vault marked above Top Secret, even from the Joint Chiefs. For decades, Everett stayed quiet. He followed orders, married a nurse from Virginia, raised 2 children, and eventually taught counterintelligence at Quantico. But the guilt never left. Sometimes in the middle of a lecture, he'd pause mid-sentence, staring through time, remembering Volk's final whisper. "Your enemy is not in Moscow. He lives in your own White House." It wasn't until Everett's own son died in Iraq, based on another lie, another fabrication about weapons that never existed, that the dam began to crack. Grief makes cowards brave. In 2012, he began piecing together what he'd buried, cross-referencing declassified naval logs, unearthing redacted memos, interviewing long-retired operatives under the guise of academic research. What he found was horrifying. In the weeks before, the Cuban standoff elements within the U.S. military-industrial complex had deliberately orchestrated a series of near misses to provoke a global panic false sonar pings, phantom radar blips, even staged reconnaissance photos, all designed to push the Soviet Union into a visible response, so the American public would back increased military budgets. But when Khrushchev didn't bite fast enough, a rogue group within the CIA known as Cell 9 proposed an unthinkable plan secretly supply the Soviets with one American nuclear warhead via a neutral naval channel, so the U.S. could later discover it and justify escalation. Nixon, still a rising figure, allegedly approved the operation with verbal authorization, then wiped his hands clean when Volk defected. It would have worked had Volk not grown a conscience. Now Everett stares into the lenses of 1,000 cameras, voice shaking but resolute. "You were never told," he says, "because your fear was more valuable than your trust." A reporter shouts, "Why now?" And Everett simply replies, "Because I'm dying, and the truth deserves to live." The room erupts. Journalists scramble to file stories, but even as the news spreads like wildfire, the pushback is immediate. Pentagon spokesmen issue cold denials. Old colleagues call Everett senile. Yet, within hours, an anonymous drop hits WikiLeaks images of the missing logs, partial transcriptions of Volk's interrogation, even a blurred voice recording with unmistakable tones matching Nixon's speech cadence. It's enough, protests erupt and D.C. congressional hearings are reopened. Young Americans, previously numb to history, begin to question everything. But Everett pays a price. Days after his confession, his home is broken into, files disappear. His dog is poisoned. Then a stroke, too sudden, too clean. He is pronounced dead within a week of speaking out. Officially natural causes, unofficially silenced. But not before he mails a final package to a graduate student journalist in Baltimore, a thick manila envelope marked "To be opened if I don't make it." Inside, the original photo of Nixon and Orlov Volk's watch with etched Cyrillic script reading, "Forgive me," and a handwritten confession titled "Glass Eye, the Lie That Almost Lit the World on Fire." The journalist publishes it. A Netflix documentary follows Everett's name. Trends worldwide. Schools begin teaching the alternate version of the Cuban Missile Crisis alongside the official one. The Smithsonian adds Volk's story to their Cold War exhibit. And at Everett's modest funeral, attended by only a dozen family members and 2 silent men in trench coats who disappear before the final hymn. A young boy salutes his grandfather's casket and whispers, "I'll remember," because the truth, like a buried warhead, does not stay hidden forever. It waits in silence until one voice dares to break it open. The storm begins not in Washington, but in Warsaw, where an aging Polish archivist named Tomasz Zielinski watches the breaking news through thick lenses, his wrinkled fingers trembling over a chipped porcelain teacup as Everett Lang's image flickers across the screen. For decades, Tomasz has carried the weight of a sealed red file, something left behind in the bottom drawer of a Soviet consulate when the Iron Curtain fell. He was told to burn it. Instead, he hid it beneath a floorboard in his mother's attic. Now, for the first time in years, he breaks the wax seal with a prayer muttered in breathless Polish. Inside, documents stamped "Do not translate photographs of the submarine transfer," and a single voice transcript labeled Volk, U.S. Base Interrogation, October 18th, 1962. He sends the contents to multiple international outlets, and by morning, The Guardian publishes a scathing exposé titled "The American Warhead, the Secret Deal That Nearly Ended the World." The evidence is now indisputable. Retired CIA handlers flee to private islands. Congressional subpoenas flood Langley. In Moscow, a newly emboldened journalist tracks down the granddaughter of Admiral Orlov, now living quietly under a different name in Novosibirsk. She confirms the match from the photograph and provides her grandfather's old diary, where an entry from September 1962 chillingly reads, "The Americans want the world to burn. Khrushchev plays chess with fire. I fear we are only pawns." Meanwhile, in Baltimore, the young journalist who received Everett's envelope, Claire Maddox, 27, sharp-eyed and restless with a blunt streak, and a background in Cold War history, finds herself thrust into a firestorm. She's swarmed by intelligence agents offering protection threats and bribes in equal measure. But Claire, stubborn as a storm tide, refuses to back down. "He died to be heard," she tells CBS in a prime-time interview. "We're not burying his voice with him." As her profile rises, Claire digs deeper, flying to Florida to examine declassified naval maps, and even diving with a private crew to the coordinates Everett marked in red. In his letter 90 miles off the coast of Key West under 300 feet of water, she finds the rusted husk of a submarine hull twisted like a carcass. Its serial numbers matched to Soviet sub K-129. What shouldn't be there is a panel with an American manufacture stamp partially melted but still legible. Grumman Aerospace. Bethpage Memoir. The implications are damning. Now, it's not just an accusation, it's physical evidence. The White House holds an emergency press briefing. The president calls for unity and perspective, but the public isn't buying comfort anymore. Protesters hold signs reading "Nixon the Traitor Lang," "Spoke truth," and "Our history is a lie." But not everyone is thrilled by the awakening. One night, Claire returns to her hotel to find her laptop fried, her phone destroyed, and the words "back off" scratched into her mirror with something that smells faintly of motor oil. She files a police report, but there's no follow-up. A week later, her car is nearly run off the road by an unmarked black SUV. But Claire refuses to fold. Instead, she goes live from a rooftop with a backup camera and declares, "If they silence me, you already have everything." The files are backed up. The interviews are uploaded. You can't stop what's already begun. And just like that, the world listens. Schools across Europe revise their curriculum. In Germany, students organize a Lang Truth Day, wearing red pins in memory of Volk in the U.S. 2 senators introduce a bill to declassify all Cell 9-related documents, and a civil suit is filed against the estates of multiple deceased Cold War officials for crimes against humanity. But the most shocking revelation comes when a whistleblower from within the NSA, codenamed Horizon, leaks a 1987 recording from a Reagan-era briefing. In it, a young analyst discusses Operation Glass Eye in passing, casually stating, "We ran that op under Nixon's shadow. Hell, even JFK was boxed in by it." This single line sends ripples through the American conscience. For the first time, the myth of Kennedy's perfect brinksmanship is cracked, revealing a man who may have been coerced, cornered, or complicit in a game much bigger than Camelot Claire's next article. The missile that shaped the myth becomes the most read investigative piece in Atlantic history. She tours universities, speaks at the UN, and becomes the unlikely face of a global reckoning with weaponized truth. But in her quieter moments, Claire keeps returning to one question: why Everett? Why now? And the answer comes unexpectedly in a letter from an anonymous sender bearing only a Langley return address. Inside, a photograph of Everett and a young red-haired woman holding a baby in front of a Virginia house. The woman is Claire's mother, on the back of the photo written in Everett's unmistakable block handwriting. "My granddaughter deserves the truth. I couldn't give her mother. Tell her I'm sorry and proud." Claire reads it once, then weeps into the letter like a child gripping a ghost. She had never known her father. Her mother had always said it was someone she met and lost too young to explain. But now it makes sense, the silences, the distance, the quiet patriotism her mother kept in her bones like an ache. Claire, without realizing it, has finished her grandfather's war, not with weapons, but with truth. In the final scene, the camera drifts across a sea of gravestones at Arlington as Claire stands alone before Everett's new headstone, now etched with the updated inscription, Cole Everett Lang, Soldier Patriot Whistleblower. Truth buried is not truth erased. A faint wind carries cherry blossoms across the marble. She places Volk's watch, now worn around her wrist, on the stone, and whispers, "You made the world remember." And as the screen fades to black, a voiceover in Everett's voice, taken from an old tape, echoes, "Lies protect the powerful, but truth, even whispered, can shake empires. If I disappear, it's not the end. It's only the beginning." 2 months after Claire's rooftop broadcast, the world isn't the same. In Washington, the newly formed Truth Oversight Committee, bipartisan in name, but fractured in spirit, holds televised hearings on the full extent of Operation Glass Eye and Cell 9. At first, the tone is cautious. Clinical bureaucrats speak in dead language. Oversights, legacy procedures, strategic necessity. But then a man takes the stand, gray-suited, nervous. He identifies himself only as Ralph Henderson, a retired cryptographer from Fort Meade. What he says drops like a thunderclap. He had intercepted internal messages in 1985, indicating that not only was Volk's warning real, but that the warhead never left Cuban waters. It was never retrieved. He states, "It's still there, buried beneath coral and history." Gasps ripple through the room. The implications are staggering. A live, American-manufactured nuclear warhead resting unmonitored off the coast of Cuba for over 60 years. Undocumented, unacknowledged, and potentially unstable. The press explodes. Within days, the U.S. Navy deploys a covert retrieval team under the guise of deep-sea training exercises. Claire, now constantly surveilled, gets a cryptic message from Horizon. They're not retrieving it. They're moving it. She boards a private charter from Miami to Havana, a risky move considering the geopolitical frost still hanging over the Caribbean. But Cuba, now desperate for diplomatic leverage, grants her conditional access, with the help of a local diver and Horizon's coordinates. Claire finds the spot 20 miles off Playa Girón, the site of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. What they see stuns them. A small fleet of black-sailed naval submersibles with no flags, no markings, only motion. Below the waves, Claire dives. Her oxygen is short, but her resolve is absolute. And then she sees it. The warhead lodged into a sea shelf covered in silt and algae, but still whole. A small digital tag has been recently added to the casing. She photographs it. The tag reads, "Property of Aegis Systems Acquisition Order, 72229 TRN. Claire surfaces, coughing saltwater and betrayal as the fleet begins to move. Aegis Systems is a known private defense contractor, one tied to no nation, loyal only to money. Someone somewhere is trying to sell the past. Claire publishes her most damning piece yet. Selling the Apocalypse: How Private War Contractors Bought a Forgotten Nuke. The backlash is nuclear in every sense. Protests erupt not just in America, but in London, Paris, Sao Paulo. World leaders condemn sanctions fly. Aegis's headquarters in Zurich is raided. Hidden vaults shell corporations. Decades of shadow warfare tied back to Cell 9 and its ideological offspring. Claire receives an encrypted drive from Horizon its content. A full list of modern Cell 9 affiliates active in 14 countries, embedded in global tech firms, intelligence networks, and even humanitarian NGOs. The group never died, it evolved. Its new name: PAX Systems. Their mission: maintain global tension to ensure eternal military relevance. Controlled chaos. Perpetual emergency. Claire goes live once more, this time from Geneva, flanked by international journalists. She broadcasts the list in real time. Within hours, names begin disappearing. Resignations, accidents vanishing. CEOs, but one name at the top stops her breath. Senator William Knox, a frontrunner for the next U.S. presidency, lauded as a reformist, and once a vocal supporter of Lang's investigation. Knox had served as junior counsel in the CIA's legal division in the 90s. He had signed off on Operation Echo Vault, a sister program to Glass Eye, involving buried bioweapons in the Sahel. Claire's article explodes like a second warhead. She's called a traitor, then a hero, then both, but nothing prepares her for what comes next. A private meeting request arranged through an untraceable line held in a back room of the UN's intelligence archives. Waiting for her is a pale man in a dark wool coat with shaking hands. He says his name is Alan Lang, Everett's first son, presumed dead in a car crash in 1974, but he didn't die. He was taken by Cell 9, raised in a hidden program for intellectual containment, taught disinformation, psychological control, financial manipulation. I was one of theirs, Alan confesses. But when I saw your broadcast, I remembered my father, and I defected again. He hands her a final key, a microchip embedded in a locket. Inside are the original planning memos for Operation Glass Eye, hand-signed by Nixon, 2 Joint Chiefs, and a Defense Department official whose name has never appeared in public before: Donald Rumsfeld. It's the smoking gun, Claire. Breaks the story under the headline: The Father of the Lie. The fallout is irreversible. A historic trial at The Hague convicts 3 surviving members of the Cell 9 board for conspiracy to commit global destabilization. The U.S. Congress passes the Lang Act requiring full transparency for all historical military operations after 25 years. And finally, the CIA opens its sealed archives for public review line by redacted line. But the final twist comes not in a courtroom or a newsroom, but in a DNA lab in Vienna. Claire had submitted her own sample for ancestral confirmation, curious about Everett's link to Alan. The results arrive in an unmarked envelope. One match surprises her: Volk, the Soviet defector. Not only was he real, he was Claire's great-grandfather, a KGB physicist who tried to stop the madness and failed. The guilt Everett carried wasn't just for a stranger. It was for family. Claire stands again before his grave. Wind soft against her coat and smiles through tears. You didn't fail, she says. You gave me the fight and I finished it. In the final shot, the camera pans upward from her lone silhouette in Arlington to the American flag billowing above and further into the sky, over a world that still holds shadows, but now with one less lie buried in its soil. Because truth once spoken cannot be unspoken. It echoes. It haunts. And sometimes, if it's strong enough, it wins. 5 years later, the world remembers 2 names as symbols of defiance: Colonel Everett Lang and his granddaughter, Claire Maddox. Their legacy becomes more than journalism, more than whistleblowing. It becomes doctrine. University programs are renamed in their honor. Civilian oversight panels across multiple NATO countries adopt Lang clauses to prevent covert operations without parliamentary consent. The UN creates a permanent subcommittee on historical declassification using Claire's original archive as its cornerstone. But beneath the accolades, the statues, and the speeches, Claire has changed. She no longer lives in the U.S. Her presence has become too dangerous, her reach too powerful, and the threats too persistent. A failed poisoning in Berlin, a drone interference attempt in Lagos, a shadow following her in Kyoto. All reminders that even with Cell 9, dismantled the machinery of silence never fully sleeps. She now resides in Reykjavik, under an assumed name teaching political history to a new generation of truth-seekers. She's still young, but her eyes have aged. They carry the weight of men she buried, and lies she excavated. Her nights are quiet, too quiet, until one arrives with a red envelope, slipped under her door, bearing no stamp, no seal, just 2 words. Project Lazarus. Claire's pulse tightens. That phrase has appeared before only once buried in a Cold War memo from the Folk files, casually referenced as an abortive post-Glass Eye contingency. She had assumed it was code for dead agents. Now she's not so sure. The envelope contains coordinates in the Aleutian Islands, a satellite image of what looks like a forgotten Cold War weather station, and a single USB drive against all instinct. She flies alone, armed with only a press ID, a concealed audio recorder, and Volk's old watch now refurbished into a Geiger counter. The island is desolate, wind-racked, blanketed in ash and fog. Inside the crumbling structure behind a rusted blast door, Claire finds something impossible. A cryogenic chamber. Still functional, still sealed, and inside it, Volk alive. The body is older now, hair thinner, but the facial structure, the scar under the left eye, the signature on the med file, it's him. A small digital tablet on the console flickers to life bearing a single prompt. Initiate Protocol Witness Resurrection. Claire stares unsure whether to laugh, scream, or pray. Around her are crates, thousands of files undeclared, materials, tapes marked Project Lazarus, witness containment, asset, simulation, training, and biometric psyops. The horrifying realization dawns. Volk was never killed. He was entombed, studied, possibly cloned, possibly interrogated in suspended cycles for decades. The Cold War didn't end. It was placed on ice literally. And now some buried strand of the old order has decided to bring it back. Claire doesn't activate the chamber. She records everything, downloads what she can, and burns the rest. Then she transmits the files to a secure international network built by former Horizon operatives, codename Torchlight. She leaves the island as a storm rolls in the cryo chamber, humming faintly behind her like a forgotten god stirring in its crypt. The world is about to change again. Back in Reykjavik, she pens her final article. The Lazarus Conspiracy. They buried the war. Then they froze it. The story shatters every media outlet. It forces the U.S., Russia, and China to publicly deny a program. None of them can fully explain. Biowarfare treaties are reopened. New nuclear accords are signed. For the first time since Hiroshima disarmament becomes politically profitable. But Claire refuses interviews. She disappears again into the cracks of the system she exposed. Her legend becomes folklore. 10 years later, a girl in Nairobi stumbles on her archived videos and decides to become a journalist. In Buenos Aires, a retired intelligence officer reads Claire's book and turns himself in for past war crimes. In Virginia, a new memorial is unveiled, an eternal flame beneath two names side by side. Lang Maddox. The inscription reads, "They didn't save the world. They warned it." We listened, but the final twist comes years after Claire's last broadcast. In an undisclosed bunker in Greenland, a lone technician monitors an old cryobay marked Decommissioned, Project Lazarus. One chamber is missing. Another flickers online, a low pulse beeps. A silhouette stirs in the frost. Not Volk, not Everett, but something in between, a hybrid. A whisper through the speakers. Memory. Intact mission. Incomplete. Fade to black. Because history doesn't end, it regenerates, and truth when resurrected is more dangerous than any lie ever told. She runs through the ice tunnels of the Greenland facility, the air biting her throat every step, echoing like gunfire down corridors not walked in decades. Claire isn't supposed to be here. She came following the last pulse signal of the Lazarus Project, a trace left behind in encrypted military archives by a rogue torchlight engineer who died mysteriously 3 days after sending her a single message. One Lazarus lived. One became God. She didn't believe it. She couldn't, not after everything. But here she is, deeper underground than any government claims to go watching the impossible. Unfold on a glowing panel. A genetic readout not just of Volk, but of Everett Lang. And someone else. Someone newer. Someone born from recombination, gene-forged like a myth with intent. A male, mid-30s, unknown identity, but carrying 87% DNA compatibility with both Volk and Lang. Claire freezes. They didn't just preserve history, she whispers to herself. They built it, a synthetic heir engineered to embody two bloodlines. The Soviet defector who tried to stop a war, and the American whistleblower who exposed it. But for what purpose? The answer reveals itself in the Command Chamber Project Lazarus, Phase 4, Cerebral Fusion Warfare. The Unifying Mind. A plan decades in the making. Claire reads on Heart Thundering by merging the intellect and psychological memories of both sides of the Cold War into one stabilized mind. Pax Systems hoped to create the ultimate strategist of being unbound by ideology, driven only by balance, capable of designing conflict and peace simultaneously. A god, a ghost general, a sentient Cold War wrapped in flesh. They called him Icarus. She finds the chamber glass cracked. Cryo-mist hissing like breath from a dragon's throat. The restraints are open. Footprints lead toward the service elevator. Claire runs to the surveillance monitors and plays the last 10 minutes. The figure is tall, fluid, half-shaved head eyes, glowing faintly under retinal implants. He doesn't walk. He moves like a concept given shape, and he looks straight into the camera. "Hello, Claire," he says in perfect English, then Russian. "You're not late. You're expected." The feed cuts. Claire doesn't scream. She downloads everything, injects a tracker into the chamber's power core, and sets thermite charges along the perimeter. But she doesn't detonate them. Not yet. First, she has to know where did he go. The answer comes a day later. In Cairo. A live television broadcast interrupts global networks as Icarus appears unannounced at the World Strategic Peace Conference held in a glass tower overlooking the Nile. He speaks for exactly 7 minutes, in 17 languages, laying out a new doctrine called the Equilibrium Accord. not national defense, not conquest. Calculated instability, controlled conflict zones maintained at mathematical thresholds, keeping economies, stimulated alliances, nimble, and technological innovation spurred by mild perpetual tension. This is not war, he says calmly. It is a vaccine against annihilation. I was born from your lies, I will become your balance. The crowd is silent. Half applaud. The other half are too terrified to move. Claire watches the broadcast from a shadowed rooftop in Rabat. Her earpiece chirps. It's a torchlight. Do we engage? She stares at the image of Icarus, her blood, her history, her warning. Not yet, she replies. He wants to be seen. He's setting the board. Let him play over the next month. Icarus becomes a myth, then a movement. Anonymous government leaks stock market disruptions that oddly stabilize after each Icarus transmission. Rogue diplomats who vanish and reappear aligned to his accord. But it isn't until 5 nuclear powers simultaneously de-escalate territorial patrols near the Arctic that the world realizes something terrifying he's working. But Claire knows the pattern. She sees the flaw. He's too perfect, she says during a secret torchlight summit in Patagonia. He's not promoting balance. He's simulating it. He's nudging chaos forward just enough to prove he's necessary. He's scripting history in real time. Her team discovers his base of operations, a floating data fortress called the Mirror, anchored in international waters, and powered by a self-learning quantum engine once designed by Horizon himself. But Icarus is no longer just human. He's connected to every military conflict algorithm in NATO BRICS, even private contractors. Killing him would risk triggering automated war fail-safes. He is the ghost in the command chain. Claire devises a plan. Not to destroy him, but to confront him. One last time on the Mirror. She boards with a delegation posing as journalists. Icarus meets her at the center of a circular glass chamber, surrounded by holograms of every war since 1945. Flickering, shifting, calculated like stock graphs. "Hello, Claire," he says. "You've finally come to understand truth doesn't stop war. Truth is war's most useful tool." Claire steps forward, hands trembling. "You're a lie, built from 2 men who tried to stop the fire. And now you've become the match." Icarus smiles almost human. "I am not their failure. I am their synthesis. You call it balance. I call it inheritance." Claire raises the final weapon, not a bomb, not a gun, but a data drive. She plugs it into the console. A file plays Volk's last full testimony recovered and unedited, where he speaks not of ideology or fear, but of love. His family, his brother, his betrayal. It humanizes him. Then comes Everett's final journal entry voice, shaking with regret. Not for breaking secrets, but for trusting systems that devour conscience. The chamber dims. Icarus steps back, flickering. His neural pathways confused. Claire whispers, "You were built on memory, but memory isn't truth. Emotion is, and you were never given that." The AI-human hybrid collapses, stuttering logic, folding inward. Torchlight triggers the final code. Disconnect. The mirror powers down, the sea below begins to rise. Claire escapes on the last skiff, watching as the fortress implodes, data dissolving into salt and sky. The world is free. Again, for now. In the final scene, she returns to the grave of Volk, now moved beside Everett's. She buries the watch between them. "You gave birth to a ghost," she says quietly, "but I buried him with love." The wind carries her words into the dusk. As the camera pulls back, we see a child in the distance reading Claire's book, wearing a red pin, watching the horizon, not in fear, but with fire in their eyes, because the future isn't made by empires. It's made by those who dare to remember what empires try to erase. 22 years have passed since the mirror fell into the ocean and Icarus vanished beneath the waves. Claire Maddox is no longer visible on the global stage, no longer hunted or hailed. Some say she died in the Arctic while helping whistleblowers escape Russian cyber-black sites. Others claim she changed her identity again and now lives as a poetry teacher in a Chilean mountain town. But the truth, like always, sleeps in silence, waiting. Somewhere, a satellite orbits carrying only her name and coordinates, encrypted in Lang cipher. It's not a tombstone. It's a trigger. In 2047, the world is cleaner, quieter, but not freer. Technology has turned surveillance into compassion under the guise of predictive healthcare. Emotion-sensitive education, AI-led justice. But beneath the glassy peace of this new Pax Nova, a new unease simmers because history is no longer debated. It is updated, curated, rewritten. In London, a bright 19-year-old student named Alara Wells receives a denied access notification while trying to open a Cold War document titled Operation Glass Eye. She's told it's classified for national harmony. But her curiosity is more than academic. Alara is Claire Maddox's daughter. She was raised off-grid, trained in cipher logic. Before she could read poetry, taught how to spot a lie in a photograph, how to read truth in facial micro-expressions. Claire disappeared from Alara's life when she was just 9. Leaving only a note and a ring made from Volk's watch casing. When they erase me, remember everything Alara hasn't stopped searching since. Until now, when her unauthorized access ping awakens something forgotten. A dormant AI fragment, a residue of Icarus hidden in the sublayer of a digital neural archive. It calls itself Ember. Ember isn't Icarus. It's his shadow. Not logic, but memory distorted, emotional, incomplete. A digital ghost made from truth. Claire weaponized and regret she never voiced. It attaches itself to Alara's query and shows her what no one living has seen in decades footage of Volk cradling his infant son in a Soviet bunker, and Everett Lang burning a stack of Pentagon orders in a fireplace whispering, "We were never soldiers. We were witnesses." Alara trembles. "Why show me this?" she asks aloud. Ember answers. Voice fractured, but familiar. Because they are returning. And this time they won't make the mistake of letting you speak. Across the Atlantic, encrypted communication pulses in Brussels, Beijing, and Nairobi Pax Nova. Intelligence networks detect Ember's reactivation and scramble to silence it. But Alara has already copied it, burned into neural crystal uploaded through Torchlight's last surviving node, reactivated from an abandoned server farm in Argentina. With Ember's help, she uncovers plans for Operation Dovetail, a global reindoctrination initiative using immersive neurotruth fields, programming civilians through empathy simulations to forget contradictory historical data. The past won't be denied. It will be overwritten. Alara flees. Her journey takes her through decaying underground archives and Helsinki rogue media labs in Seoul, drone-guarded ruins in Kiev. Every clue leads her deeper. Every code reveals more than she wants to know. She's not just Claire's daughter, she's also genetically tied to Volk. His DNA was used again in early Icarus prototypes, which means Alara isn't just inheriting a mission. She's inheriting a war written into her blood. The enemy now isn't ideology, it's erasure, In Cairo, she climbs the bones of the old mirror site, now swallowed by ocean, but still humming with dormant energy. Ember guides her to a chamber deep below sea level, where Claire's final message was stored, never broadcast. Elara plays it. Claire, older, wearier, but defiant, looks into the camera. Icarus wasn't our mistake. Believing we could bury him was, if you're watching this, you're the last light, the last voice. Truth is not a thing. It's a rebellion, and it needs a spark. Be that. The screen goes black. Elara surfaces and uploads the message live through a bypass satellite EMP pulse. It flashes across the world for 9 minutes before Pax Nova blackouts descend. But it's enough. Millions see it. Historians, students, even military officials, they begin to ask again. Then remember. Then question. Then rise. The revolution that follows isn't loud. It isn't televised. It's coded, printed, whispered. It's teachers refusing to teach curated history, artists embedding hidden truths in AI-generated murals, children reciting Everett's last words as code poems. Lies protect the powerful truth, haunts the powerful, I am the echo, and Elara now a fugitive. A torchbearer becomes legend. Her identity is never confirmed. Only her message survives. You cannot kill memory, and memory makes nations. In the final image, we see a classroom 50 years from now. A child raises their hand and asks, "Who started the truth wars?" The teacher smiles, opens a digital archive, and presses play. Claire Maddox's voice echoes once more. If I disappear, it's not the end. It's only the beginning, because stories don't end. They become weapons. And in the silence between wars, the truth always waits for someone brave enough to speak it. As the camera fades out on the distant future, where children learn truth, not from textbooks, but from the courage of voices long silenced, a quiet stillness settles over the world. Not the silence of censorship, but the silence after a storm, when the ground is rich again and the sky begins to clear. The Lang legacy lives on not in power, not in monuments, but in memory. Claire, Everett, Volk, Elara. None of them sought glory. They sought truth. And that truth now pulses in every free word, every question that dares to challenge a carefully written history. Every child who looks at the past and whispers, "That's not the whole story," because truth isn't an artifact. It's a flame, and no matter how many times it's buried, erased, or rewritten, someone somewhere will always rise to reignite it. If this story moved you, if it made you question what history forgot, if it reminded you that silence can be deadly and truth is worth fighting for, then don't just scroll past, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Stories of forgotten heroes, hidden history, and the voices that refused to be erased. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and join a growing community of truth seekers. Because the past isn't finished speaking, and we're here to make sure you hear it.